Oddworld is such a weird universe that it's not surprising that with all these weird species and names like Gluckons, Paramice, Moloch, Munch and all that, in some ways it's not really surprising that they decided to call the main character Abe. It's sort of odd because of its normality. So how did Abe get this name? Well, firstly, it's interesting to point out that whether a character on Oddworld has a weird Oddworld name or a normal Earth name seems to depend on their species. If one member of the species has a weird name, they all tend to, and vice versa. Gluckons, for example, seem to have weird names, Drippic, Aslic, Flake and all that. Arguably, Lulu isn't that weird, but then again it arguably kind of is. And either way, Lulu is kind of a weird Gluckon anyway, sort of an outcast. Mudokons tend to have normal names like Abe, Alf and Toby. Though out of universe, this was probably generally started based on whatever Oddworld inhabitants decided to call the first named members of each of these species, so presumably Mudokons have normal names simply because Abe has a normal name. It'd be a bit weird after all if Abe was called Abe but his fellow chumps were called Gozzlebozzle and Deektard. So why is Abe called Abe? I'm talking out of universe here by the way. In universe, presumably his mother Sam just decided to call him Abe. I guess she liked the name. Well, one theory is that Abe, being the freer of slaves, is named after Abraham Lincoln. Fits nicely, I guess. Another theory is that his name is in reference to someone in the Bible called Abraham in the book of Genesis. In researching this particular thing, I came up with a funny potential coincidence. When making my video on Moloch the Gluckon, I mentioned that his name resembles the name of the Canaanite god of sacrifice, Moloch. Well, when I said that, I was thinking, I've never heard of Canaanite before, I wonder what that is. I didn't look into it, but upon reading about Abraham of Genesis, the first article I found on it, which happens to be on the Encyclopedia Britannica, says, according to the biblical book of Genesis, Abraham left Ur in Mesopotamia because God called him to found a new nation in an undesignated land that he later learned was Canaan. So it's interesting that those two names of the main protagonist and antagonist have been, albeit arguably loosely, connected to Canaanite. So I think in Genesis, this Abraham basically receives a message from God to become like a leader of his people or something, and Abe of Oddworld of course also receives a message from his ancestors to lead his people. Abe is the Messiah and Abraham is varyingly connected to the Messiah in some way in various religions, so that's interesting. On another note, for years I believed that Abe's full name was Abraham Lur. This is because this is what is stated on the Oddworld Wikia, which I've just found out is called fandom now. Why I don't know, but there you go. However, I recently looked for it again. I say recently, it was actually more than a year ago now I think, and it was no longer listed as his name on the Wikia. I was then told that it was bait. Literally the word lure of course means bait, and I got hook, lined and sinkered, or whatever the phrase is, into believing this piece of lore or lure was real when it was just someone trolling. So I thought, oh well, how about that? So I've gone years thinking Abe's name was Abraham Lure, and it just turns out it was someone messing around. And indeed, if we have a look at the edit history on the Wikia, in 2014 a mod states that he removed the bits about Abraham Lure being his full name because he can't find any legitimate sources to back it up. Fair enough.
It was the story of Abraham Lure, and
Wait, what? Question and answer session with Lorne Lanning was uploaded to the Oddworld Inhabitants YouTube channel, and literally in the first answer, Lorne just casually refers to Abe as Abraham Lure. Plus, shortly after, Oddworld Abe's Origins came out and confirmed that Abe originally started out as Abraham Lure, and shows several pieces of early concept art of Abe titled as such. So yeah, that's that really. Those are the theories I know about. I vaguely remember something like the publishers or something didn't like Abe's name at first and asked Lorne to change it, and Lorne said, I'm terrible at choosing names, I just chose it randomly. And the publisher thought about it for a while and then said, okay, let's just go with Abe. But I couldn't find any sources for any story like that, so I don't know if I just made it up, and even if I'm not, I'm probably just remembering it wrong. Hopefully, in Oddworld Soulstorm, we will find out more about Abe's full name, like maybe his middle name is Josh. Except that's not the end of the story. Ars Technica has been releasing these really good videos lately, I'd recommend watching them, called War Stories, and they released one with Lorne Lanning, and in it Lorne says this.
Abe was named after Abraham. So if we go to the three Abrahamic religions today, Judea, Christianity, and Islam, they were all based off of this character, Abraham, the real Abraham, because he would become the beginning of a new thought. And that's how I always thought about our characters, where this was the beginning of myths that would live on in their world, but we're going to catch their story of these individuals taking their journey. We're going to be there as they began something that would become a global religion.
So yeah, there's more of an elaboration on Abe's name from Lorne Lanning, the man himself.
Hello, follow me.